And it's being presented by our guest speaker, Neil Polachek from vSplash. Before we begin, we have one quick housekeeping item. Feel free to type in any questions you may have in the question box on the screen. At the conclusion of the presentation, Neil will be happy to answer those questions. And with that, we're ready to begin. We'll turn it over to you, Neil.
Okay, thanks, Brad. Let's see. Let me get this going here. There we go. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Brad. And thanks to everyone at the local Search Association. I've titled this presentation The New Digital Divide because as I pour through a lot of data that vSplash is generating via its SMB DigitalScape program, it's become more and more clear to us and to me that there is a new digital divide. And for anyone who touches small and medium-sized businesses, it's pretty clear that we're at a very critical stage in the evolution of the marketplace. Before I get too far along, I wanted to talk a little bit about vSplash. vSplash is a provider of digital media and commerce solutions to SMB and local marketing and commerce aggregators in the United States and around the world. They do that with some 325 certified resources, both in facilities in New Jersey, Lyndhurst, New Jersey, and in Hyderabad, India. They offer managed services and solutions, platforms and tools. You may have heard of Buzzboard, and data analytics. A lot of today's data comes out of the SMB DigitalScape data. And they do this for directory publishers, newspapers, radio, online pure plays, local TV, SMB aggregators, as I said, in the United States and around the world. I'm currently an advisor to Umesh Tibrewal, who's the CEO and founder of vSplash, and to their team, and as is Mark Cannon, who many of you know is an industry expert from his days at Yale and AOL and a number of other internet companies. So with that, let's move on. A world of global mobile connectivity. I think it's fair to say that everyone is well aware of most of this data on this page. Actually, the U.S. smartphone adoption growth rate is probably going to slow as more and more people have already adopted a smartphone of some fashion. And because of the rapid adoption of these smartphones, by 2016, 50% of the world will have internet access. So that there still will be a digital divide in many of the developing countries in terms of the consumer side, but in terms of the developed markets, I don't think there'll be much of a digital divide anymore as we used to think about it, at least from the standpoint of the consumer market. And I saw an interesting fact this morning that's not on this slide, that 90% of mobile searches today result in some action, and that's in the United States. So clearly we're at a very much a tipping point about the whole mobile connectivity and what this all means to SMBs. So in my mind, and I think it's fair to say probably in a lot of people's minds, we're seeing a divide, and it's a widening canyon, you might say. Bill Clinton, who does have a way of crystallizing some important concepts, said this when he was president about the internet. And you can read the statement, "It is dangerously stabilizing to have half the world on the cutting edge of technology while the other half struggles on the bare edge of survival." And I think the conclusion, and what I'd like to argue today, is that many SMBs, particularly independent small SMBs, are increasingly at risk of being left behind as consumer adoption rates accelerate and merchant adoption rates are somewhat static. Let me take us back a little bit to the first big box movement. That was probably some 20 to 25 years ago, and was really the big box movement that applied to the retail side of the business. And I grew up in Westwood Village near UCLA, and when we got there in 1965, all these stores were there that I've mentioned here. Staples, though, came along and displaced a company, little stationery store called Campbell Tolstoy. Best Buy eventually displaced Pacific Stereo, where I bought my first amplifier and speakers. Macy's displaced this clothing store, Rudnick's, where I used to be dragged by my mom to buy dress shirts and sport coats. And finally, Superdrugs, the store where I'd meet my friends after junior high to buy Super Bubble and M&Ms, was replaced by CVS. Why? Well, the scale for buying, for technology implementation, and for advertising and marketing drove lower prices, and you couldn't compete in the retail market very successfully with these large big box companies if you were selling, on price. And so many of these small and medium-sized businesses in the retail sector got, pushed aside by the big boxes. And that trend has continued. Today, this is from the American Independent Business Alliance. Independent businesses face unprecedented competition from larger chain competitors, internet merchants, and franchises that enjoy national or international branding power and major economies of scale. As a result, community-based businesses comprise a smaller portion of our economy than ever before. So what I'd like to argue here is that, and demonstrate, is that there's a next big box event happening. And that big box event is now, I think, going to potentially happen on the service side of the marketplace. It might mean that my friend David Freeman, the dentist, might take a job working for Aspen Dental that presented at the last LSA conference and focus on dentistry instead of dental practice management, for instance. Or my friends at North Bay Motors who fix my car will toss in the grease rag, so to speak, and take a paycheck from an interesting startup called Your Mechanic out here. Or Darlene, who's been the local massage therapist around here, will have exited the business because Massage Envy, a national chain, national franchise, opens a location nearby. Or Steve Marshall, the plumber, will go work for ServPro. Or maybe even the chiropractic shop, Corsano Chiropractic, will be displaced by The Joint. All national companies displacing independent SMBs. Why? Because that independent SMB is incapacitated, frankly, by the complexity of digital marketing, advertising, and how to engage with their customers. What's the core issue? Core issue is really a paradox. Core issue is that in the past, traditional media has always been incredibly easy to understand. You bought an ad in a book, you get a phone, and you get phone calls. You buy a radio spot, you reach thousands of consumers. And the merchants simply signed a contract, reviewed some copy, and paid the bill. And it worked like a charm, at least, as John Wanamaker said, 50% of the time. Now we have digital solutions. They're difficult to understand, they're challenging to implement and execute, but in theory they are infinitely more measurable. But they're, as I said, they're complicated and they're ever evolving. And the consequence of that paradox is confusion and frustration. And that, I believe, is one of the core drivers of what I believe is a growing gap between the consumers out there and the merchants. On the consumer side, as I said earlier, they're racing to use digital devices, iPads, smartphones, laptops. Now there's Surface from Microsoft and the mini iPad and the devices from a variety of manufacturers. Untethered, unconnected, no longer connected to a laptop or a desktop, free to move about wherever. And these adoption rates continue to accelerate, and too few SMBs have fully functioning web presence across mobile, social, and local. And as a consequence, merchants are falling behind. SMBs are skeptical of many of these local sales channels. There are a dizzying number of providers out there. In fact, some people have said that as many as 40 sellers contact an SMB today in a week's time to sell them something about helping them with their business, with their marketing and advertising. So at the end of the day, these merchants are really quite incapacitated. You know, when I was back at BIA Kelsey, John Kelsey and I launched the Local Commerce Monitor in 1999. And what we know from that survey, that great survey that BIA Kelsey continues to do, is that SMBs are now using 5.8 local media. That compares to 3.0 a couple of years ago. That's not inconsequential. That's almost 2 or 3 times more media that they're using, different media. But that makes their lives much more complicated. And as a consequence, you know, they have confusion and a tremendous amount of frustration. So back to that divide, there's this increasing gap, and these SMBs are not keeping pace. My view is that they're not keeping pace because everybody's out there trying to sell them something and not really forging a trusted relationship with that customer. And importantly, they're selling them products and not solutions. And that's really at the heart of it. They're not terribly trusted, and they're pushing product, not solutions. And that's what we'll talk about some more as we get into this. But that gap is increasing. Now, that's not to say that the national companies are that much farther along. I'd argue that national companies are probably midstream in figuring out how they're going to embrace the social, local, mobile context. Multi-location businesses aren't much further ahead than SMBs, but at the end of the day, the SMBs are certainly, you know, the least far along in trying to figure it all out. And partly because they have so few, you know, they don't have the resources that a national company has, or even a multi-location company has, a franchise company, for instance. They have very few resources to help them through this. And that's really what's missing from the marketplace, are solutions supported by trusted sellers. Does it matter that these businesses don't have a tremendous web presence? Well, this data, which I continue to refer to, is from the Boston Consulting Group. And it suggests that businesses with a higher or medium web presence have 41% more growth opportunity. Excuse me, that's very fundamental. And as I said earlier, 90% of mobile searches result in an action, either a visit, a phone call, or a purchase. So let me drive down into some of the data. As I said, SMB DigitalScape is a large data set. It's to deliver intelligence on scale based on empirical evidence. It's, in a sense, big data about the state of SMB digital development across the SMB value chain. Looks at media, commerce, and solutions. And it's really about helping the marketplace understand how big the opportunity and how to seize some of those opportunities. So SMB DigitalScape is organized into about 5 buckets, but there are over 110 parameters that the DigitalScape data generates. Looks at site metrics, how well is the site built, sort of what's the foundation like of those sites. Looks at search issues, how well is the site prepared to be found by search engines. It looks at local issues. Does the business portray itself as a local business on the web? And how well is that business optimized for the social experience? And finally, can mobile customers, mobile consumers find that business because it's well optimized for the mobile experience? So that's the broad sort of context of the SMB DigitalScape. So today and tomorrow, well, today our estimates are that there are some 200 million SMBs in 50 countries around the world, about 30% with some sort of web presence on a global basis. At best, 15% have some functioning digital presence. It may be even less than that. By 2016, again, 200 million SMB businesses in 50 companies. They'll be driving about $25 trillion in global GDP, and we believe upwards of 45% will have a website on a global basis, and maybe as many as 32% or 35% will have a functioning digital presence, 30 million businesses. Well, what that means for anybody who's selling to those businesses is that there's a tremendous opportunity to upgrade, build, and deploy fully functioning web presence for SMBs around the world. Now in the United States, vSplash has looked at, there's one data point here that's wrong. vSplash has looked at 20 million businesses have been analyzed, and over 2.1 million websites have been audited. And so even in the United States alone, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to help these small and medium-sized businesses upgrade and participate in this, clearly revolutionary, this revolutionary or evolutionary experience of helping SMBs participate and connect with consumers who are finding them on their devices. So we shared a bunch of this data back at the LSA conference in April, and even since then, the SMB DigitalScape data set has grown by additional 10 parameters. It's grown from 4 million listings to 20 million listings, or it's looked at 20 million businesses, and in the number of URLs that it's analyzed or audited has grown from 700,000 to over 2 million. So considerable additional data in the data set of SMB DigitalScape. Now there are many ways to talk about this data set. I thought I would put it in the context of, an auto race. So let me give you a sense of what that means and why I've chosen this to describe it. In our estimate, there are just a few SMBs around the United States and frankly around the world who what I would call are raring to go. This means they have a mobile website, that their website is optimized for the mobile experience, and most of the key elements of a best practices web presence are in place. Very small percentage are actually raring to go. There's another large bucket, well not so large bucket, of businesses that are at the starting line. They're almost ready to go. Their website and presence is relatively well functioning, but they're not yet optimized for the mobile experience, and they may be missing a couple of the key elements. So they're almost there. Then another large bucket is leaving Pit Alley. Can you still hear me? I think my power just went out.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, because my power just went out. They don't have a mobile optimized website, and they're missing more than 5 elements, for instance. So this is a fairly large number of SMBs, and maybe they shouldn't even be leaving Pit Alley. I guess we're having some rain issues or some issues here. And then there's a whole group of businesses that are in the pits. It's generally a website built by a brother-in-law's nephew's friend for a high school project. These are really websites built in the late 1990s or early 2000s that merchants may think are working, but in fact don't work at all. And then, of course, there's that group that we could find no discoverable web presence for. So they're on the outside looking in. Now, if you look at the data, about 1% of all SMBs in the U.S. are raring to go. Another 9% are at the start line. that's 10%, but that leaves nearly 90% really not ready to and able to participate in any substantive and sustainable way in this digital revolution. If you rebase the data to those with websites, and we estimate that about 55% of SMBs in the U.S. have websites, well then only about 2% are raring to go, 17% are at the start line. That still leaves considerable numbers of SMBs still struggling to really participate in this evolution. Let's dive a little deeper into the data. We looked at one of the additions to the SMB DigitalScape that we made between earlier this year and later this year, between March and September, is that we looked at the speed of these sites. What this shows is that about 50% of sites, 40% of sites take longer than 3 seconds. Let me give you a sense of what 3 seconds is like. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. That's pretty long for sites to load, and the best of sites need to probably load faster than that. The solution is that, a lot of these sites need to be rebuilt to take advantage of new technology, use the latest HTML5, and probably eliminate a lot of the flash that are on a lot of these sites. So there's a great opportunity to improve the performance of many of these small business sites, which cause poor user experience. E-commerce. Second parameter that we added to the analysis was to identify those sites, those SMB sites, with and without an e-cart. And as you can see, just 5% of the 2.1 million sites we analyzed are enabled with an e-cart. Critical piece of any e-commerce experience. The consequence of this is that for many SMBs who might think they would like to or could conduct some e-commerce transaction, they can't because they're not enabled to do it. And it also puts them behind those businesses that are capable of doing that, and they're usually larger businesses. Again, putting a further divide between their consumers and themselves. We also looked at how many sites today are analyzing the data and using Google Analytics. I'm sure there are other easy means of measuring traffic, but Google Analytics is free and is pretty easy to implement. What this suggests is that just 34% of all those SMBs out there are even trying to understand some performance metrics on their site. So easy free tool out there. Very few, relatively speaking, are taking advantage of it. Here's another very critical one. Just 11% of these sites have location in the meta title. Consequence of that is that in terms of local SEO, it's a huge missed opportunity. It's an easy fix, very large opportunity to improve their search results and improve the search performance. Most sites are lacking any ranking. This is clearly an important parameter. Shows that a 10 would be a site like Apple or Facebook in terms of ranking. Well, it's not likely that any SMB is going to have that kind of ranking. But what this shows is that 95% of the sites have a Google PageRank of 5 or less. That's a function of poor SEO and means they're going to get limited traffic. So as you can see, as we continue to roll through this data, the SMBs in the United States, because this is the United States data, are really in a poor position to compete with either national companies that obviously would have considerable higher rankings, or even the multi-location companies that probably have better rankings than the individual and small SMB. Now in terms of Facebook, certainly many SMBs, according to BIA Kelsey's latest LCM Wave 16, 50% self-report that they actually have linked their website to their Facebook page, or they're doing something on Facebook. But in reality, according to SMB DigitalScape, only 22% actually have a link from their home page to their Facebook page. So there are lots of SMBs all wrapped up in thinking about Facebook as an additional channel to reach their consumers. Many of them think they're doing something to do that today and linking back to their website. Clearly, many more think they're doing it than actually are doing that. So another great opportunity to shore things up. Many businesses that put out a form to fill out are not spam proof. In fact, what we've discovered is that most are not spam proof, which means that people are putting, SMBs are putting forms up on their sites that are not spam proof, and as a consequence, the consumer who fills out that form runs the risk of additional spam. So that's not a good consumer experience at all. And finally, few are able to leverage mobility. So we've talked a lot this morning about the growth of smartphones and tablets. According to Google, this picture here is from Google, a mobile-friendly site makes me more likely to buy a product or use a service. 67% of consumers say that. Contrasting, 61% say, if I don't see what I'm looking for right away on a mobile site, I'll quickly move on to another site. So there are huge consequences of SMBs not being able to participate in this mobile experience and having their sites optimized for that. According to SMB DigitalScape, 98% of all SMB websites in the U.S. are not optimized for the mobile experience. So it's really a very fundamental piece that's missing from the market. Now, again, it's a widening gap. I think it's fair to say that the statement that I made earlier, that there's this growing gap, I think the data, certainly supports that thesis, that many of these SMBs are falling behind and falling short of where they need to be in order to participate in this evolution. So where do we go from there? Well, remember the core issue, confusion and frustration. On the one side, traditional media, very simple and easy to understand, easy to buy, but it had a somewhat vague ROI. We knew 50% of it worked, 50% of it didn't. Digital solutions, on the other hand, difficult to understand, difficult to implement, always changing, but data-driven ROIs. Where do we go from there? Well, this is a competitive map of where I see the world today. On the left axis is the cost of sales, and on the that's on the y-axis. On the x-axis, customer engagement. I think where people want to be is in that high margin region, where the relative cost of sales is relatively low and the customer engagement is relatively high. That would mean low churn, reasonable sales cost to get to marketplace. Now what I've mapped on this competitive map are the traditional media companies in the lower left-hand corner. Cost of sales is relatively high. And in cases of some of these media, there's not a lot of engagement in terms of the customer, in terms of participating in that media. Yellow Pages traditionally was a once a year, sign here, run for a year, move on. Even cable there's not that much engagement. If you go up the y-axis, we run into companies such as Intuit and One-to-One and GoDaddy that are either self-service or SaaS-based models, relatively low cost of sales, but not a lot of customer engagement. You can go online and get a website from One-to-One, and then that's sort of the end of the engagement. Going along the lower axis, the x-axis, we have online players, companies like Reach Local or Demand Force or Yodel, who are actually much more engaged in that customer's business, but again have some, relatively high cost of sales. So the opportunity is to find a way to get up into that upper right-hand corner. Now, if you compare that to the product map, it may look a little busy, this product map, but let me take you through the various axes. The axis on the bottom is looking at, is the service acquisition, customer acquisition centric or retention centric? Up along the left-hand axis, is it high churn or low churn? From a, how quickly do these customers churn on or churn off? The top axis is long-term value of that customer, and the far right axis is margin, high and low. So if you look at the map, I've tried to do some approximation of the number of SMBs that are participating in these various product sets. SEM, relatively high churn. I think that's not unknown. There's no surprise there. And SEM is, to some extent, an acquisition-centric model. Has relatively low long-term value to the provider if these customers churn on and off, and the margins, are probably in the mid-range. The top end of that, put Yellow Pages, relatively high margin, acquisition-centric, relatively sort of middle ground long-term value, and used to be relatively low churn. As we move to the right on this map, there are these new services, new products that have been rolled out in the marketplace. Deals and SEO and online listing management, email and messaging, ID and social management or reputation management, and scheduling. All of these services start to cluster around much more to the right of the map in the retention-centric mode. The churn starts to go down as you go into scheduling and things that start to move, frankly, into the business process aspects of a merchant's business. Scheduling, very clearly, an important aspect of the business's process, moves away from the acquisition model and more into the retention model. Email and messaging. Well, you can't email a customer you don't have. So those emails and those messages are really intended for the customers you already have. Enabling online listings management so you can be found again and again, retention-centric. All of these start to cluster over to the right side of the map. Well, but they're all sold as products today, and where the real opportunity is to shift all of these things up into what I would call a solution set that marries acquisition and retention, that marries scheduling and email messaging, that marries online listings management and deals, that marries a holistic solution so that you can actually move up into higher margin, higher long-term value, and lower churn. And, I would argue that many businesses are starting to understand that the opportunity to grow an existing customer $100 to $120 over a year is a very appealing opportunity. And so much of what the marketplace has been presenting to merchants has been about acquisition as opposed to retention. So I believe a lot of where the opportunities rest is in helping merchants move from a sort of acquisition-centric model to a retention-centric model. Well, there are channel implications for that as well. Today's acquisition-centric model doesn't require much beyond an undifferentiated sales channel. What I mean by that is a horizontal channel that can go to a plumber in the morning, a dentist on their next appointment, a baker in the middle of the day, a salon in the afternoon, and a tire place in the late afternoon. They can go from one to the next. They don't have to have an intimate understanding about that merchant's business. But in order to get up to the upper right-hand corner, it's my belief that you have to have a more vertical-centric sales channel. That channel has to have a much a much deeper understanding about how those merchant businesses operate. You know, what it means to be in the salon business is very different than what it means to be in the plumbing business. And to be able to have that conversation in an authentic way, I think, is really critical to moving from the lower left-hand corner to the upper right-hand corner. So more and more we're seeing businesses and resellers start to take on a vertical-centric orientation, because what it means to the ultimate buyer, the merchant, is that that channel appreciates their business, understands it, and they're authentic in their ability to present a package or a solution that is consistent with the needs of that particular vertical channel or vertical market. So where does this all take us? Well, this is a map, I think, of where we are today in terms of SMB participation in spending on the lower axis against, you know, best practices in digital readiness along the left-hand axis. Most SMBs are in the lower left-hand corner. It's my belief that in order for those SMBs to participate in the economy going forward, they're going to have to move up significantly from that lower left-hand corner, at least into the middle of the map. They may not be at best practices in the next 4 years, but they certainly need to be in a place where they can participate and take advantage of all these technologies that are developing around them, and be able to offer the consumer an experience that enables that consumer to engage with them on their phone, on their tablet, find them on their phone, find them on their tablet, schedule an appointment, get an email, engage. Fundamentally, that's where things are going to have to go for these SMBs to participate and to be part of the economy going forward. So what's that mean? Let me summarize. Consumer adoption of digital engagement is far outpacing the SMB adoption and transformation. There's tremendous noise in the channel, and there's this paradox of choice. They're incapacitated to make a choice because, as I said earlier, so many of the digital solutions are difficult to implement, hard to understand, and not sold on a holistic basis. A local merchant, you know, at the end of the day, that merchant did not choose to get into that line of business, be a dentist, be a beauty salon person, be a plumber, what have you, to be a digital marketing guru. They chose to be a dental guru, a salon guru, or a plumbing guru. And what's happened is the marketplace is forcing them to become a digital marketing guru. And in the absence of them doing that, they're going to look to others to do that for them. The data I presented from SMB DigitalScape provides an empirical assessment of where the condition is of these SMBs. And the opportunity is to raise the trust factor, build solutions, not products, which will lead to a more sustainable and profitable customer relationship. That's in the end where this is all headed. Trust, support, you know, build that trust through through solutions and not products. And so much of what is out there today is one-off products. You know, we can do reputation management, or we can do, you know, scheduling, or we can do email marketing. But the real opportunity is to build these holistic solutions that are vertically oriented, authentic in delivering it to the vertical marketplace, and that will drive that trust factor. And that's how you build sustainable long-term relationships in the marketplace. On a final note, being from the Bay Area, go Giants, beat the Tigers, and thank you, and I'm happy to take questions now. Brad?
Yes, thank you, Neil. We do have a few questions that have come in. One of the first question is, what is a meta title?
That's a meta title is in the title of the website. It's in the it's like it has it's a programming thing for the website where you put it into the header of the website. I'm not a technology person, so I'm a little out of my league to explain exactly what it is, but it's when the search engines look at these websites. Location, I live in San Anselmo. If that's not in my meta title on my website, then I'm not going to have the location-centric orientation that I want so that people who are looking for me in San Anselmo, where I live here, can find me.
Okay. Next question is, what companies are doing a good job of helping SMBs cross this digital divide?
I think companies like DemandForce are doing a really interesting job. They don't sit in that acquisition space. They sit in the retention space. They've lined up their business in terms of verticals. They can be authentic in describing their solution to those verticals because they've thought a lot about those verticals. I think Dex1 is doing some really interesting stuff in their guaranteed packages where they're trying to take the mystery and the confusion and frustration out of it for the SMBs. So I think those are two companies coming at it from different places that are doing really good jobs of it. I think that there's some sellers in the marketplace, resellers, Yodel's doing an interesting job in how they are looking at the marketplace. There's Reach Local, there are all the various YP companies. I think they all are starting to understand this need to help these SMBs cross that chasm. I think there's some leaders. I think as we see the, DemandForce was valued at a very high multiple when they were bought by Intuit. I think that sort of triggered a lot of alarms with some of the players in the marketplace who hadn't seen what they were doing or understood it as well, to figure that there's some real opportunity in evolving towards that retention side of that chart I showed earlier. So I think a lot of companies are now onto that and are going to start to develop and build solutions rather than sell products.
Okay, a related question, how difficult are the challenges of getting an SMB across the divide?
Well, they're not really that difficult. In some of these cases, adding a location into the meta title is a very easy thing to do. Taking Flash out of the site so that it operates more quickly is easy to do. Getting a mobile site, there are lots of players out there who will build a mobile site from an existing, fixed website. So there are lots of solutions out there. A lot of the fundamental building blocks of these sites that need to be fixed are really quite simple to do. It's that many of these merchants think that their site is perhaps operating better than they in fact actually are. It's one of the reasons that vSplash built the Buzzboard tools to help sales reps out there quickly analyze the performance of that merchant's or that SMB's websites and be able to make a very quick proposal to say, your site is broken in 17 ways. It's not very hard to fix those 17 things. Here's a solution to do that. So a lot of the fixes are relatively easy. The challenge is educating the marketplace so that they understand that their websites aren't, as robust or aren't in sort of best practices range, or that they just need to, add a mobile optimized website to their portfolio. So relatively easy. The challenge is educating.
Okay, great. We've got one more question.
Mm-hmm.
What should SMBs be thinking about in terms of mobile?
Well, I think, if you're starting a business today, I think you start with a mobile-centric view that anything you do on the web has to start with the mobile experience and frankly move backward to the fixed experience. So, I can't imagine a business opening today that wouldn't, if they were going to have a website built for them, have that website built in a way that it's optimized for the mobile experience. Given the number of consumers out there who are you know, using phones, smartphones, tablets to look and to engage with that business marketplace. I think any startup today, any small business starting today needs to start with mobile at the center of their digital plan as opposed to on the edge of it, and then move that direction. So we'll see in the next couple of years. We'll look at this data down the road and see if there's a significant shift in the number of mobile optimized websites out there. It would surprise me. It would be a shame if there weren't. It would not surprise me if many of the SMBs aren't educated that they need to do that yet.
Okay, well, that's all for our questions. We want to thank you, Neil, and vSplash for your insights in conducting the presentation. Some great information.
Well, thank you, LSA, and thank you, everybody, for listening in. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of this information with you today. And have a good day and a good weekend. Thanks very much.
Thank you.